is it? The abomination of desolation, when is it? Last week, we went over the abomination of desolation. What is it? God willing, next week, we'll go over the abomination of desolation. Why is it? And then in the fourth week, the abomination of desolation, how to avoid it. So today, part 2, abomination of desolation. When is it? And so the abomination of desolation is an end time. This is what it is, but it also tells you when it is. It's in the end time. So the abomination of desolation is in the end time. And the abomination of desolation is an end time abominable king that sets himself up in the Jerusalem temple. So we sang that song, Up to Jerusalem. I was glad when he said to me, come on up to Jerusalem, dwell in the house of the Lord. Well, this dude is also going to want to be in the temple, though he has not been called to be there. So he's going to be standing where he ought not, as we learned last week. But this is an end time abominable king that sets himself up in the Jerusalem temple as supreme ruler and causes his abominable army to stop the daily sacrifice of the Israelites in the temple, and then destroys the temple, destroys the city, and destroys the abominable people of Israel. And the destruction begins the Great Tribulation. So we know that the abomination of desolation is in the end time, and it's going to be at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. But how can we prove this? Well, we're going to prove it through the scriptures. First of all, we're going to resume where we left off last week. So you remember this image from last week about Daniel's 70 weeks. So in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24, it says 70 weeks are determined upon your people and your city. So this is one of the angels, Gabriel, who was speaking to Daniel in reference to Yah answering Daniel's prayers. And this angel says, 70 weeks are determined upon your people and your holy city. So notice this is what the prophecy is about. It is not primarily about Yeshua, although Yeshua is integral to it. It's about your people and your holy city, okay? At least that's what we're going to focus on right now. So then in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, it says, "No one understand that from the command to restore and build Jerusalem to Messiah the Prince shall be 7 prophetic weeks, and then 62 prophetic weeks, and the street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times." So we know that God says, know something. We're learning it today. Understand something. Hopefully we will understand it today. There's not something that has to be hidden. It's hidden from the world, but it doesn't have to be hidden from us because God's revealed it to us. And he says there's a starting point for these 70 weeks. It's from the command to restore and build Jerusalem. And then it says that the street shall be built again and the wall even in times of trouble. That's the starting point. The end point of the 69 weeks, because he says first there's going to be 7 prophetic weeks and then 62 prophetic weeks. So at the end of the 69 weeks, after that, Messiah the Prince shall be cut off. That's the end point. So the start is a declaration, go back and restore and build Jerusalem. And then the end point for the 69 is after the Messiah the Prince is cut off. And then we have a 70th week, which we're going to talk about. So let's just real quickly do a little bit of math, just a little bit. So 49. If we look in this first column on the left, where it says 70 weeks, you got a week has 7 days. So 7 weeks times 7 days is 49 days. If you do a day for a year principle, it turns out to 49 years. Remember, these are 49 prophetic years, so it's going to get a little bit complicated, but just follow real quickly. So 49 years times 360 days. Why 360 days instead of 365 and a quarter? Because we're talking about prophetic years, and a prophetic year is 12 months times 30 days. Okay, 12 months times 30 days is 360 days. That's a prophetic year. But now what you have to do is divide that by 365.25, because that's a literal year. And when you do that, starting with 445 BC, which is what he has up here, and which is something I agree with, you have to subtract 48 days, because the difference between those is going to be 48 days, the difference between the prophetic years and the calendar years. So when you do that, that is 48 years. So if you subtract 48 years from 445 BC, that leads to 397 BC. So when it says in Daniel 9:25, know and understand that from the command to restore and build Jerusalem to Messiah the Prince shall be 7 prophetic weeks. 7 prophetic weeks leads us from 445 BC, when the declaration was made, to 397 BC, okay? And then we have the 62 weeks. So let's cover that. When you have 62 weeks, 62, every week has 7 days. 7 times 62 is 434, 434 days. A day for year principle is 434 years. This is 434 prophetic years. So 434 years times 360 days. Why 360 days? Because it's a prophetic year. Prophetic year is 12 months times 30 days in a month. 12 times 30 is 360. So this is a prophetic year. So 434 years times 360 days. And then you divide that by 365.25 days, because that's a literal year. And that equals really 428 years. So if you take 397 BC, you subtract 428 years, that leads you to 31 AD. Of course, there's a year 0, so you subtract the 1, and that leads you to 30 AD. And we believe that Yeshua was crucified literally in 31 AD. So depending on when you start the count, when you end the count, it could be 30 or 31 AD. We believe it's 31 AD, but either way, that's what it was. Okay, so that's the 62 prophetic weeks. Now it says in Daniel 9:26, the first part, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. That's when he was crucified, either in 30 AD or 31 AD. And you could say this calculation leads you to 30 AD. And then after that, he was cut off. So literally in 31 AD, he was cut off. Okay. So that's pretty simple. And then not Daniel 9:26, the second part. This has to do with a different person. This different person is the people of the prince. We talked about that. That's Titus. The people of the prince, Titus, that shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So let's go back to Daniel 9:24 for a second. You see up here in the blue, it says, 70 weeks are determined upon your people and your city. So when you read in Daniel 9:26, it says the people of the prince, who's Titus, that shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So he destroyed the holy city, which is Jerusalem. He destroyed the temple, the sanctuary, and he destroyed over 1 million people. So we know it's Titus that is doing this. And if you want to look in history, there's a precedent for this. Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. Also, and even the Maccabees, and this is in 165 BC, 167 BC, somewhere at that time. They talk about Antiochus Epiphanes was one who brought an abomination of desolation because he destroyed the city. He destroyed many people, though he didn't destroy the sanctuary, but he defiled the sanctuary. So we know this is not talking about Yeshua destroying the city and destroying the sanctuary. Neither is the next part talking about Yeshua. Okay, so now in Daniel 9:27, we see it says, and he, speaking of a future person. So just like Antiochus Epiphanes was a type of Titus, Titus is a type of the end time person. And we know that there are types in the Bible because we know there was an original Elijah. Then John the Baptist came, who's a type of Elijah. We're going to have another Elijah in the end time. So 3 Elijahs. Same thing here. We had Antiochus Epiphanes, we had Titus, and we're going to have an end time type of person as Titus. So Daniel 9:27, and he, this is a future person, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So this is the 70th week. We covered 69 weeks. After the 69 weeks, which ended in 30 AD, after that, the Messiah was cut off. He was cut off in 31 AD. And it says, now he, an end time person, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. This is the 70th week. And in the middle of the week, so that's after 3.5 years, in the middle of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Again, it is not talking about when Yeshua came in 31 AD, that it was him who stopped the sacrifices because he was the ultimate sacrifice. That's a different prophecy. That is a truth, but that's not what this prophecy is talking about. Although some prophecies can have dual meanings. So in looking at this chart, the part here, right in the middle where it says Daniel 9:26, if you look above that, you see the destruction of Jerusalem happened in 70 AD. So if Messiah was cut off in 31 AD, 40 years later, in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. So what's interesting about 40? 40 is a time of trial and testing. Well, it's also interesting that Yeshua appeared after he was resurrected for 40 days before he ascended. Then there were 10 more days till the day of Pentecost. So he preached for 40 days. Israel didn't repent. A day for a year, 40 years, the temple was destroyed. Okay. And then also you see right above where it talks about destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, says the present dispensation of the church was not revealed to Daniel. How do we know that? We're going to prove everything. But so we'll prove that in just a second. But you see over here to the right where it says 3.5 years and middle of the week, Daniel's 70th week, it says to the right of there, 2 times and a half a time. So time, times, and a half a time, that's 3.5 years, 42 months, that's 3.5 years, 1,260 days, that's 3.5 years. All of this is prophetic. So 3.5 years, prophetic, even the 70th week is prophetic. So it's not going to be a literal 7 years, a little bit shorter. A time, times, half a time, same thing as 1,260 days, same thing as 42 months. Why 42 months? Because if there's 30 days in a month, if you do 3.5 years, you come out to 42 months. Okay. Now let's go on. This prophecy will be fulfilled at the end time, i.e., just before the coming of the Messiah. So I have a little asterisk here because I have a note. And this note says, a future type of Nebuchadnezzar, actually Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and Titus, aka this person that's being spoken of in Daniel 9:27, is the same person as the beast, also known as the king of the north. So please keep that in mind. He's known as the beast. Of course, the woman who rides the beast is the Roman Catholic Church. The beast is the Roman Empire that's revived, also known as the king of the north. So we're going to go into the king of the north in a very short period of time. Okay, so hopefully all of that made sense. Now, we said it's at the end time. And now we get into the king of the north and the king of the south. Please understand this section of scripture. Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 45. Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 45. It says, at the end time, the king of the south shall push at, and some versions say shall attack, the king of the north. The king of the north shall come against the king of the south like a tempest with chariots, horsemen, and many ships, and the king of the north shall enter into many countries and shall overflow or flow over and pass over. What does this mean? It means the king of the north is victorious in war against the king of the south. Then the question is, who are the king of the north and the king of the south? Well, do you remember that there was Alexander the Great? So he died. When he died, his kingdom, the Greek Empire, was split into 4 different generals, right? That's prophetic. If you want to know that scripture, that's in Daniel chapter 8. Ha! And so anyway, it's split between 4, but 2 of those generals, Lysimachus and Cassandra, they kind of disappeared into nothing. And Seleucus, or Seleucid Empire, you might have heard of, they became the king of the north. So the Greek Empire, the Seleucid Empire, you can see that up here in the kind of light gray. That's the Seleucid Empire, and this red line divides it. Notice what's above the red line. What's above the red line is Jerusalem and indeed Israel. So north of Israel, that's why it's called the king of the north. And then the king of the south are the Ptolemies. You probably heard of the Ptolemaic rulers that ruled over Egypt, for instance. So because the Greeks came in first, and then the Romans came in, and then other people came into Egypt. So the king of the north would have to be countries north of Israel and west of Israel, because the Greeks were indeed west of Israel. And you can even see Macedonia over there. That's where he came from. And God willing, we will be visiting a part of where Alexander the Great was as we go on our cruise to the Mediterranean. And then many of us have already been to Egypt, where the Ptolemaic Empire was headquartered. So we got the king of the north, which is also encompassing some of the nations of the west, the Western Europeans, and then we have the king of the south. All right, so let's go on. In verse 41, it says, the king of the north shall enter into the glorious land, which is Israel, and many shall be tripped up. What does this mean? Many shall be tripped up. What does that mean? He's going to enter into the glorious land, and many shall be tripped up. What does that mean? It means that many of these Israelites are going to come into allegiance with the king of the north. They're going to start believing some of the same apostasy that the rest of the world is believing. And that's where you got the beast coming in, because the beast being ridden by the Roman Catholic Church, false Christianity, some of these people are going to turn to false Christianity. So they're going to be tripped up. The king of the north shall cause many in Israel to commit apostasy by signing a 7-year covenant. And this is my notes where you see it in red. And this is part speculation in terms of exactly when it's going to happen. The king of the north shall enter into the glorious land. It could be at this exact point. It could be a little bit later. But anyway, so the king of the north shall enter into the glorious land, which is Israel, and many shall be tripped up. How? The king of the north shall cause many in Israel to commit apostasy by signing a 7-year covenant, which is going to be, since the king of the south attacked the king of the north, and the king of the north fought and demolished the king of the south. Just think about what happened. The king of the south, south of Israel, right, comes through Israel and terrifies Israel. The king of the north comes from the north and attacks the king of the south and vanquishes them, and then says to the Israelites, you don't have to worry anymore about the king of the south coming up to fight against you or to terrify you, because we've got your back as long as you sign this covenant to be in league with us. So something like that is going to happen. Okay. Now, the king of the south, headquartered in Egypt, Egypt is an Islamic country, right? So we believe that this is going to be a federation of Islamic nations, the king of the south, pushing against a federation of so-called Christian nations, the Western European nations. So you have Islam against Christianity going into a great battle. Christianity wins and says, hey, you Israelite people, you Jewish people, we gave you victory, we gave you freedom, sign the 7-year covenant, which is Daniel's 70th week, and we will be your protector. Now, it goes on to say, but these shall escape out of his hand, out of the hand of the king of north, Edom and Moab and the chief of the sons of Ammon. So the Edomites, despite what people say today, are not all lighter skinned brown, lighter skin shade of brown people living in America. Edomites are primarily the Turkish people. Then you have the Moabites, who are the Arabians. And then you have the sons of Ammon, who are the Jordanians. And it's kind of interesting that even Amman, Jordan, is the capital of Jordan, Amman, Jordan. Okay, so that's what it's talking about. And then in verse 42, it's still in Daniel chapter 11, the king of the north shall stretch out his hand on the lands. The land of Egypt shall not escape. So again, we saw that he's going to be fighting against the king of the south, headquartered at Egypt. Lets us know that the Egyptians will be defeated. So most likely the king of the south pushed out, attacked the king of the north. The king of the north came down through Israel and attacked the king of the south, vanquished them. Verse 43, he shall have power over the treasures in gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Are they also Islamic nations? Yes, they are. The Libyans, Islamic nation. The Ethiopians are Islamic people today, although there are some Christians, some Jews there. So they are the next ones to be attacked. Then verse 44, but news out of the east and out of the north. Now we're talking about out of the east, China, and out of the north, Russia, and maybe even aligned with Russia is Iran. And isn't it interesting that these three nations are very closely aligned today? They hate the West. They want to be in control. China right now is leading, although Russia wants to overtake China. And so it's, not a very close alliance, because Putin is not going to let Xi Jinping outrule him. And then Iran, they're not going to allow either of these two to outdo them. But the Iranians are supplying the Russians with drones to attack the Ukrainians. And China, of course, is waiting to see what happens, if Europe can stand up. If not, they plan on attacking Taiwan, and they want to see what's happening. And you better believe that Russia and Iran, if Russia wins in Ukraine, and the coalition of these almost king of the north right now, the European nations, if they crumble, then China's going to know, hey, I've got free reign. That is the same thing that we're talking about in the future. So please keep your eye on prophecy, because what's happening now is similar to what's going to happen in the very near future. So, but news out of the east and out of the north, China and Russia shall trouble the king of the south, and the king of the north will go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. So this is going to be the Battle of Armageddon at the last time. And then in verse 45, it says, he shall plant his palace tents between the seas. Now, what seas are we talking about? He's going to plant his tent in Israel between the seas. What seas border Israel? Mediterranean. Very good. And the Red Sea. The Red Sea is part of what borders Israel. Or maybe it's the Dead Sea. What did I write down? I probably wrote down the Red Sea. Yeah, I said Red Sea. So we're going to go with Red Sea. But look it up and see if I got that part right. So he shall plant his palace tents between the seas. And we know it's in the glorious holy mountain. Where's the glorious holy mountain? This one I know I got right. That's Mount Zion, which is Jerusalem. So he's going to, again, come up to Jerusalem where he ought not to be. And he's going to plant his tent there, his palace tents. And then this, after 3.5 years, is when he'll break the 7-year covenant. That's when his true colors come out, because he wants absolute world domination. Okay? It is the Red Sea. Thank you. Google, Mrs. Google, found the answer. Oh, okay. So now let's go to Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. Again, we know that this is happening. And if you go back and study commentaries, go back and study history, Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 45 has to do with the end time. Stopping at verse 39 is Antiochus Epiphanes, which we're not getting into that. But now we're going to Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, continuing on. So it says, at that time, speaking of chapter 11, when it says the king of the north shall plant his palace tents between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, which is Mount Zion, and that's Jerusalem. At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great ruler who stands for the sons of your people. He's the warrior. Gabriel is the messenger that was speaking to Daniel and still speaking to Daniel. And he's telling him that Michael, my companion, the one we believe is the second archangel, Gabriel being one, Michael being the other, and perhaps Lucifer was the third. But anyway, Michael shall stand up, the great ruler who stands for the sons of your people. There shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation until that time. This is speaking of the Great Tribulation. Another question. there shall be a time of trouble such as never was. So if there's a time of trouble, unlike any other, could there be a time of trouble like this one that we're talking about? No, because it's like no other. So there's one and only one great tribulation, and this is at the end time. So again, Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 45 is talking about at the time of the end. Here it's also talking about at that time, the time of the end, there's going to be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation until that time. That's the great tribulation. At that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone that is found written in the book of life. So we know, and we're going to get to this as well, when it says at that time your people shall be delivered, you remember Revelation 12, it says that the dragon sends out a flood to try to decimate the church of God, but God opens up the earth swallows up the flood, and people are taken to a place of safety and nourishment, except for some who are left behind, which we believe will be people with Laodicean attitude, plus the two witnesses obviously will be testifying during this time. We're going to cover that a little bit more. Daniel chapter 12, verses 4 through 7. Daniel chapter 12, verses 4 through 7. If anybody wants to dispute that this is talking about the end time, let's again read this, although you can start in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 45, where it talks about at the end time. This is another place where it shows that this is at the end time. So Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book. This is the book of Daniel, even to the time of the end. Okay, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. What is this time called that we're living in today? The information age. Amazing. Many shall run to and fro. Have we ever been able to travel like we have today with airfare, boats that are speedboats, whatnot, trains, cars? So yeah, people running to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Perfectly describing the end time. Then I saw two others standing on the band of the river, one on the left side, one on the right side. One asked the man clothed in linen, when shall be the end of these wonders, which is the great tribulation, which is the second half of the 70-week prophecy, because that's 7 years. In the middle of the 7 years, after 3.5 years, he breaks the covenant. So at the end is the 3.5 years. So he tells us, the one clothed in linen answered, it shall be for a time. Didn't we hear that before? Yes, we did. It shall be for a time. That's 1 year. Times is 2 years. So that's 3 years altogether. Then a half time. That's 3.5 years. So he's telling us that the great tribulation is going to last roughly for 3.5 years. When they finish scattering the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. So again, this is about persecution of God's people. Daniel chapter 12, verse 10 now. Daniel chapter 12, verse 10. Many shall be tried and purified. Again, you're rich, you're increased with goods, you have need of nothing. You don't know that you're miserable, blind, and naked. Who is that describing? The Laodiceans, right. Weak Christians. Yes. Did you say Agent Orange? Well, yeah. All right, so yeah, many shall be jailed. But anyway, many shall be tried and purified. But the wicked shall do wickedly. None of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Okay, what does this say? Does this say that Steve, as a wise person, is going to be in the dark? Is that what it says? No. It says Steve, as a wise person, shall understand. This should not be a mystery. We're going through it right now, trying to make it as simple as possible, because it's not a mystery. Scripture and history tell us what has happened and gives us type of what's going to happen, okay? So this is not a mystery. And we understand that even though the Great Tribulation is Satan's wrath against Elohim's people, Elohim uses the 3.5 years long Great Tribulation to purify the people of Elohim. So another thing that's interesting, the people of Elohim to outsiders look like Israelites. Why? Because we observe the Sabbath, we observe the holy days. To outsiders, they can't tell the difference. And especially now, since so many of us recognize ourselves as physical Israelites, right? And that's becoming more popular, more well known. So while scripture talks about this king of the north fighting against people, it can be dual. It can be physical Israelites and it can be spiritual Israelites. For sure, it will be spiritual Israelites, and for sure, it will be physical Israelites. It's going to be both, because Satan is mad about both groups of God's people. Okay? So the Great Tribulation is Satan's 3.5-year wrath against Elohim's people. Yes. So now, let's turn to Revelation chapter 12, verses 12 through 17. Y'all did not know this, but I set up a telescope that had a sound system on it, and I actually caught the voice of Satan as he's being cast down from heaven. And that's what that was just now. Ah, that was him being cast down from heaven. You want me to play it again? Okay, I will. I did anyway. Y'all want to hear it again?
No.
All right, I won't just. All right, so Revelation chapter 12, verses 12 through 17. Revelation chapter 12, verses 12 through 17. Rejoice, heavens, and you who dwell in them, but woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has but a short time, because this is at the end time. When the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman, which in this case is the true church, not the false church, the woman that rides the beast in Revelation 17. This is the true church. And this is the one who gave birth to the male child, which is Yeshua. And so that was a jet plane. And it says in verse 14, 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman to fly into the wilderness to her place so that she might be nourished for how long? A time and half a time. I should have said a time and times. That should be plural. And half a time. Sorry about that. So that's 3.5 years. We just saw that in the book of Daniel. So these two times are talking about the same time. And why? Why are 2 wings of a great eagle given to the woman? It's to fly into the wilderness to her place so that she might be nourished during this time of great tribulation from the face of the serpent. So we just heard that the serpent wants to persecute God's people, but yet we're seeing that God's people are taken away and they don't have to suffer through that persecution, except that we see in verse 15, it says, the serpent spewed water out of his mouth after the woman, like a river, that he might cause her to be carried away by the stream. That's a suction sound. So verse 16, the earth helped the woman by opening up its mouth and swallowing up the river, which the dragon spewed out of his mouth, which is armies to chase us. And the dragon grew angry with the woman and went away to make war with the rest of her offspring. So it's still the church. So some of the church are taken away to a place of safety and nourishment, and some are left behind. Now we know that the ones left behind, at least are the 2 witnesses, not that they're Laodicean, even though it does say in type that Joshua had on dirty clothes and he had to take off the dirty clothes and put on new clothes. So the type of Joshua is one of the 2 witnesses. Even Moses, of course, at first didn't believe God. God said, okay, I'm going to send you Aaron because you're just wimping out on me, so he'll speak for you. So maybe the 2 witnesses were a little lax as well, but they certainly gained a lot of power later. And the Laodiceans. And when I'm saying Laodiceans, I'm not talking about church eras. I'm just talking about people who have that spirit. But these are people who keep the commandments of Yah and stick to Yeshua's testimony. It's just that they are not on fire. So God sends them through the fire of the Great Tribulation to get them on fire for him. Okay, that should make sense. Hopefully all of us are on fire right now. So again, when is the Great Tribulation? We know it's at the end time, but specifically, we know the Great Tribulation is also the 5th seal. So in Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 through 11, this is Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 through 11. So we know it's at the end time. We know at the end time, it's going to be 3.5 years. That's when the Great Tribulation is going to happen. And that's after the 3.5 years of the king in the north being at peace with Israel and the rest of the world. But then 3.5 years in, he changes colors, destroys the temple, all that kind of stuff, destroys the people, destroys the city of Jerusalem. But we know that the Great Tribulation equals the fifth seal. Well, how do we know this? Let's turn to Revelation chapter 6 and verses 9 through 11. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. Didn't we just get finished saying that the remnant who keep the commandments and hold the testimony of Yeshua, they're the ones who are also persecuted during the Great Tribulation. So it says, when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And this is figuratively speaking, and they cried with a loud voice. Dead people don't cry, they don't speak, but they cried with a loud voice, asking, Master, when will you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And the response was, rest for a little while, for a little time, until both your fellow servants and your brethren, those about to be killed as they were, have their number made complete. So God's going to allow a number of people to die. And then notice it says white robes were given to them. This is key to understanding the Great Tribulation. Right now, we're talking about when he opened the fifth seal. Notice that white robes are associated with the fifth seal. All right. White robes are associated with the fifth seal, as well as persecution being associated with the fifth seal. So the seal is when white robes are distributed, the fifth seal. And then if we look in Revelation chapter 7 now, we're going to tie the white robes together in the Great Tribulation. Revelation chapter 7, we're going to start in verse 3. Revelation 7, verse 3. An angel said, don't hurt the earth or the sea until we have sealed the servants of our Elohim in their foreheads. I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000, having been sealed out of every tribe of Israel. This is not a literal thing. This is going to be spiritual Israelites. After these things, I saw a great multitude out of all the nations standing before the throne and the Lamb. So the 144,000 are sealed so that they don't have to go through the tribulation. Could that indeed, again, be the ones who were taken to a place of safety? Yes, indeed, it is. So it's the same thing. But then the remnant were left behind, those who had the Laodicean spirit. So after these things, I saw a great multitude out of all nations standing before the throne and the Lamb, clothed with white robes. We know white robes were associated with the fifth seal. Now notice how these white robes are associated with the Great Tribulation. In verse 13, it says, one of the elders asked me, who are these who are arrayed in white robes? And from where do they come? Verse 14. Then he said, these are the ones who came out of the Great Tribulation and have washed their robes and have whitened them in the blood of the Lamb. So we see white robes associated with the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation is the fifth seal. So we know the Great Tribulation is the fifth seal. No doubt about that. I have another note. And this one says, the Great Tribulation is when white robes are distributed. The fifth seal is when white robes are distributed. Conclusion, the fifth seal is the Great Tribulation. Okay. So we saw this before when we talked about the 7 trumpets to transition, which to this day is still the most viewed YouTube video that we've put up. People apparently really enjoyed that. So the fifth seal is Satan's wrath against God's people. And then the seventh seal is God's wrath against Satan's people. And you can see these seals as it shows you on the top. And I think I can do this without messing up. Yeah, maybe I won't do that. So anyway, it says the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse at the top left-hand corner. The first seal, you got the white horse. That's deception. Second seal is the red horse. That's war. Third seal is the black horse. That's famine. Fourth seal is the pale horse. Yeah, is the pale horse. That's death. The fifth seal is the Great Tribulation. That's persecution. Satan's wrath against God's people. You have the sixth seal, which is the heavenly signs. And then you have silence in heaven. And during this time, That's when the golden censer is cast down and God says, no more prayers, no more intervention. Then we have the seventh seal. So we can see the sequence of events. Okay. And so before the seventh seal is the sealing of the 144,000 and the vision of the innumerable multitude coming out of the great tribulation. And then what happens is God says, now it's my time. And this is going to be when he takes over. So the great tribulation is roughly starting in the fifth seal. And then you see very shortly after that, the sixth seal, the heavenly signs, and then the seventh seal. Okay. Okay, so Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place where it ought not, whoever reads, let them understand. Do we now understand? Do we now understand? How many of you feel confident that maybe with a little bit more study, you can actually teach this to either your children, grandchildren, to your spouse, to your siblings, to your parents, to your friends? How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you feel comfortable? Very good, that you can, okay, that's excellent. That's how it should be. I know Mr. Sunday feels comfortable, but he just is so humble, he didn't raise his hand. Unless he disagrees with what I was saying. So, but, and Eric?
I agree for the most part, but it's a couple of things I'm shaky on.
Okay. Well, do the study, just go over it again. And independent of what I've said, study other material as well. But Matthew chapter 24, verse 5. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, which we went through, Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 45, Daniel chapter 12, standing in the holy place in Jerusalem, in the temple, where it ought not to be. Whoever reads, let them understand. Another jet plane, because it's the same thing that we saw before, Matthew chapter 24, verses 16 through 24. Then let those in Judea flee into the mountains. Flee. When you see, flee. Same thing. Satan knows that he has a short time. He comes after the woman, and then the woman is given 2 wings of an eagle, taken away into the wilderness. Same thing here. Then let those in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him or her that's on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his or her house, nor let him or her in the field turn back to take their clothes. Woe to those who are pregnant, who have small babies. Pray that your flight is not in the winter nor on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation, such as never has been nor ever shall be. Now, was Yeshua confused? I asked the question earlier when it was talking in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, saying that there's going to be a time such as never was. Yeshua is saying, such as never has been nor ever shall be. Is Yeshua confused? No. Was Daniel, well, it wasn't even Daniel. It was Gabriel who was speaking to Daniel. Was Gabriel confused? No, because they both coincide. This is one time and one time only. It's the Great Tribulation, which is at the end time. Okay, and speaking of end, this is the end of the message. The abomination of desolation is an end time. So that tells you when it is, not only what it is an end time abominable king that sets himself up in the Jerusalem temple as supreme ruler and causes his abominable army to stop the daily sacrifice of the Israelites in the temple and destroys the temple and destroys the city and destroys the abominable people of Israel, both physical and spiritual. The Laodiceans in attitude, the ones who are physical Israelites that aren't even obedient, that entered into this covenant and started to be deceived by the beast and the false prophet. So the destruction begins the Great Tribulation. And that's it. Any questions or comments?